seen my share broken halo, folded wings that used to fly. They've all gone wherever they go, broken halos that used to shine.
Hey everybody, Master Craftsman back here with installment 2 on door casing. Today we're going to cut all the sides, but first we have to cut our heads. I'm also going to measure for the heads at the same time as cutting them. That's how I do it. I don't measure and then come back to cut heads. What I typically do is dry fit them. But sometimes if I have to do like, say 10 2/6 doors and then 1/3/0, I'll just cut 10 2/6 heads, and I'll just trace it all out. I'll get one dry fit and then I'll make a couple of lines on the next one. Just lay it up against it, make a couple of lines where the miters go, and that always works out. So that's basically what we'll be doing today, is cutting our side casing, measuring and dry fitting our head casing, and then we will move on next week to installing it all. So today, enjoy the cutting. The main things you'll notice is it's all about organization. You keep your lefts and your rights separate, and that way you can cut all your lefts at once without having to move your saw angle at all. But with the head casing, it's a little different. I tend to alternate my 45s each time I cut each head. I'll cut this side, move my saw to the other 45 position, and then cut the other side. That's just the way I've done it. You could also, I guess, cut all the rights of the heads and then switch the miter saw angle and then do them all at once. It'd probably even be a little faster, but sometimes fast isn't really as good as just being easy to comprehend what's going on, really, because then you end up with a bunch of half-cut heads, and it's whatever you end up doing will be fine. But just pay attention to how I'm lifting the casing up off the saw a little bit. I use a number 2 pencil. It's a 0.9 millimeter. That doesn't matter for that part, but what it does matter for is having a great pencil for your carpentry bench. 0.9 millimeter pencil lead or graphite or whatever you want to call it is definitely the way to go for carpentry. And if you're going to use the sharpening pencils, I would suggest you have one on your tool belt pencil sharpener so you can do it quickly. But without further ado, here we go with installing door casing part 2. Here we are again. This time we're going to be cutting all the casing with just dry fit. Also, we're going to cut these heads. So I've rough cut this head to overlay about 4 inches because we got 3.5 inch trim. So notice I'm making my mark here right where the end of the head jamb is, right where it meets the side jamb. That usually will give you the right gap to, the right reveal to not hit your striker plate against your bullnose trim. Especially when you have white trim, that will leave a black mark on the trim after the painter's done painting it. You want to avoid that. You'll see there, I measured drywall to drywall, or whatever I did there. That's just giving me a rough cut. I'm rough cutting all the heads first. You could, cut everything just an inch bigger than a 2.6 for a 2.6 door. Oh, I'm sorry, that's for the interior of the miter. You'd want to add for 3.5 inch trim. You'd want to add like 7.5 inches. For 2-inch trim, you want to add another 5 inches or whatever. Just make sure you got some wiggle room. So here I'm laying it up where I've got plenty of overhang on both sides. Now I'm going to go back to my saw, lay it there. There I'm showing, it's not exactly a 3/0 door. It's like 3 plus an 1/8. Sometimes it is different. That's why I like to dry fit everything. But you can see that that side has a drywall. It came too close to the side casing, so we had to rip that side casing. So what we're going to do is have to cut the miter with a flat spot. So there, I'm cutting from that overhang straight to the drywall. So then I'll go back, dry fit it against the drywall, perfectly flat against the drywall. Put it right up there and give myself a little mark. That'll put a flat spot on the end of your miter and make it all match up with what you had just ripped. We're going to mark that number 3. Since it has a flat spot, it won't go for any other door, plus it's a 3/0. Each door has a mark at the top of the head jamb on one side of the door. That was part of the last video. If you skipped it, you should go back and watch part 1. There I'm butted up against the drywall again, because that's another rip cut. I mark each side right at the end of the head jamb. Make your marks nice and big so you can see them easily while you're cutting. You don't want to be searching for your mark. The painter will be able to cover all that stuff up. And a lot of times we cut the line out anyway. That's a piece of waste. You won't be able to use that for anything. Sometimes it happens. And that's just going right in the trash. But that's part of this. You notice I have some little extended pieces that I set on my head case on. Those are great for baseboard and all kinds of stuff. And just these are actually the way I designed my saw table to fit on top of a Ryobi. It makes it so where it traps those baskets down firm against the table. And I just bang it in there with a hammer and remove it each time. Then those baskets, they come right off the saw table. And so does the saw.
You may choose to build your own saw table. I actually encourage that if you have multiple people on site every day. But if you're having to carry your saw table that you built, I guarantee it will be too heavy. So here I'm cutting drywall to drywall, getting it to where this can be fit in between the drywall and dry fit. There's a little damage on that door, so we're going to make the gap just a bit smaller on that side so to hide that. That head does not want to sit perfectly against the jamb and the drywall, so we're going to have to fix that. I'm just going to hammer it all out. You'll notice I'm coming down at an angle with my hammer right now. It's ripping the drywall out as I hammer, because the angle will pierce the drywall's paper, and the downward force rips it clean off right where you need it. I'm going to give it a mark on each side. Take it back to the saw. You see me breaking lead quite often. That's a 0.7 millimeter pencil that I have kicking around. So I'm going to size up to a 0.9. 0.9 millimeter lead pencils are definitely the best for our type of work. This is not rough carpentry. You need a fine tip for trim carpentry, like a number 2 pencil. Here I'm showing you could just mount a pencil sharpener right on your saw stand. I would also suggest maybe you have one on your tool belt. Also, on this nail gun, you'll find there's a pencil sharpener mounted right on it. You just stick your pencil right in that hole there. It's covered in with sawdust. But if you would like this nail gun, it's available for purchase in the description. It's called a Bostik 18 gauge brad nail. It's my favorite brad nail. It has what they call the smart point, which is overall just a really sensitive safety. We forgot to mark these side casings within this room. That'll happen. But our method, our system, keeps everything very organized. So if you ever forget something, you know exactly where it's going to go, and you won't get confused. didn't get confused here for sure, because I just went back, separated the left and the right, had the corresponding door number, and then I won't have to remember where that goes. I'm just saying I can't remember if I cut the head from the inside of that bathroom or not. So I just went back to my saw table, so I do not have one. And I can tell that because I've numbered them. There I'm just measuring for my rough cut, for my dry fit. 37 inches should be plenty of overhang. This door, I believe, was a 2-4. So here I'm rough cutting 2 pieces at the same time. Same measurement. That way when I come back to dry fit, I'm not running back to my saw. Here I've noticed as I was dry fitting this piece, it didn't want to sit flush against the drywall and jam, so I'm going to grab my hammer and do some downward blows to rip that drywall right out of there. And then I'll use my hammer claw and just rip everything out and make sure it's all nice and flush. And you definitely don't want a bunch of drywall and stuff just sitting up there ready to fall. I noticed a screw pop. What a screw pop is where the drywallers screw the drywall down to the studs. If they didn't get it exactly, if they didn't tighten it down as far as they possibly can, and it's just about an 1/8 inch or 1/16 inch from the stud, then while I'm pounding on the drywall, it can cause that screw to protrude. In a lot of cases, this is unavoidable for a carpenter and will have to be fixed by either the drywallers or the painters or the builder. In other cases, it is your fault that you used that method. In this case, it wasn't really my fault. That drywall should have been tight. In other cases, you really shouldn't be hammering on stuff. But around a door, around any door, you should be able to hammer pretty much anything. The drywallers have a lot to screw to, so if they didn't get it screwed down properly, it's not really your fault. Here I'm telling you, make sure to have your blade moving fast right before you plunge in. Moving your blade very fast before you plunge, basically revving up your electric motor all the way before you plunge. Will make you a nice clean cut. And for casing, that's exactly what we need. A nice clean cut. Here we're just going to cut all our heads, set them right up here on this stool. You'll notice that little stool is actually like a 2-foot ladder. It's very helpful. Here I'm just varying my saw to each side to cut these heads. But later, when we cut the sides, we won't vary it. We'll just cut all sides at once. You can see this goes very quickly, even though you have to variate the saw. But alternatively, as I said, you could just leave it on the left and cut all heads to the left, and then vary it to the right, and then cut all the heads again to the right. It's up to your preference. Repetition is key here. We need to keep things fast. Speed will make you money, and accuracy will get you return business. So we need to get both at one time. This is how you do it. I've seen many systems for casing, and I've seen a lot fail. This one has never failed me, not once. I always know where everything goes. I always know exactly what to do next. When I set down my opposing sides, I prop them up on something so they're easy to grab. Sometimes I'll put a tool case over here where I'm setting these so they're easy to grab. But this time we have got a stack of baseboard right there. That'll work. We're dealing with the pencil trick now. What the pencil trick is simply setting a pencil down on your saw table right before the blade, like maybe about 4 or 5 inches off from the blade, and then flexing the wood. It will raise your casing up off the saw table to give it an angled cut. That'll ensure when you have imperfect walls, which they all are, you won't have any instances where you have an open gapped miter. That is never a alright thing to do. Have an open gapped miter. You want to be sure never to have an open gapped miter, even if you have spackle. Our work is not to spackle our way through. Our work is to get the wood to meet perfectly. I'm starting a pile right next to my uncut wood. What I'll be able to do then is have everything right next to where I'm working. You definitely don't want everything spread out. We're going to make sure everything's tight against the fence. Keeping it tight against the fence will keep the angle from getting variated. That is definitely not what we want. You can see a slight angle, or bevel, is what it's called. Beveling that trim will make everything fit perfectly, even though we have imperfect walls. That's the pencil trick. This is a rip cut. Since it's a rip cut that is perfectly straight, and I used the fence the whole time, we can set it right against there and make our cuts. Here I'm realizing I don't have my shim in place. Here I will show you how I use a shim to replace the pencil in the pencil trick. So I've carved that shim into a pencil shape. It's about as thick as a pencil is, and round. It's all rounded off. It doesn't necessarily need to be round, but it does make it easier for trim to roll right over it. We're just going to screw that right down to the table with a piece of trim. I'm flexing it down by pressing it, I don't know, about 12 inches off from the blade. As I press it down, it pops that end up and gives me a nice bevel. You can see how fast this can go. Here I'm showing you about how fast it can go. Explaining things sometimes takes a little longer. And also, as you're going through it with the camera, things get a little bit tough too. But this work should be very quick. You should be able to cut about 10, 12 doors worth of casing. Doing all the cutting for the sides should only take about 10 minutes. I'd encourage you to find some way to lift your trim off the table without having to use your pencil. The pencil is a great way to do it if you're not cutting a lot of things at once. But it tends to move. It moves all around your table. And you have to keep it in place as you're cutting everything. It's a perfectly straight rip cut, so we'll go ahead and set that right up against the fence like normal. However, if it weren't, which I'm sure we'll run into again, then I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to flip it around and opposite the mark. I think I missed showing you that, but you can go back and watch through the video. You'll notice it's one of the first pieces I cut. I have to extend my mark to the other side, flip everything around in order to get the piece tight against the fence on a factory edge. Doesn't always have to be a factory edge, but it at least has to be cut on your table saw with the fence. That's about everything for today. Thank you all. Remember to like, share, and subscribe.